Hey there everyone, Travis Bowman here. Did you know that there was a Nintendo 64 exclusive that was a platformer, RPG, third-person shooter, strategy game, and one-on-one fighter all in the same cartridge? As a big-time Sega fan, it's really odd for me to say this, but what we're about to talk about is my favorite game of all time. This is Hybrid Heaven. In an attempt to do a proper review of this gem, I'm going to be showing gameplay throughout the entire game. However, I'll do my best to keep it mostly spoiler-free, and I won't be showing any of the in-game footage for those that might want to experience it firsthand. Now let's get into the review. Released in Japan in August 1999 with the rest of the world following soon after, Hybrid Heaven is a mixed bag of a ton of different genres, and that's why I think I like it so much. It perfectly blends elements of strategy, RPG, and platforming without overstaying its welcome in any one category. All of the footage you're seeing here was captured from a real Nintendo 64. My console is RGB modded, and I'm using the RetroTink 5X to upscale the footage to 1080p 60, so be sure to watch this video at 60 frames per second. Now, at its heart, Hybrid Heaven is a fighting game. The gimmick that makes this game stand out from every other fighting game is the stop time mechanic. You're in a room with one enemy, and the goal is to take him out before moving on to the next area. Instead of button mashing your kicks and punches, the game really makes you use a sense of strategy and careful planning to make it through the fight without dying. Once you get into a position, pressing the A button will stop time. Then you have all the time in the world to figure out your next move. You'll have an arsenal of different punches, kicks, and grappling moves. This may seem like a really slow way to do battle, but it actually goes by a bit quicker than you might imagine. Think of it like a turn-based RPG like Final Fantasy, only we're in a 3D space, and the only magic here is just perfect timing. If you're good, and I mean really good, you can hit a perfect spot on your enemy's body and you'll get a yellow flashing awesome. This means you've basically hit a perfect blow on the enemy for maximum damage. These awesome hits are rare, but it's oh so satisfying if you can pull it off. You'll have to decide which punch or kick to use based on your positioning. Positioning in the game is everything. You won't connect if you're too far away, and if you're too close, you might not inflict as much damage. Here's where the RPG part kicks in. You can level up each part of your body, both offensively and defensively. Yeah, even your head can get a few upgrades. Once you see how much damage you'll take from an enemy headbutt, you'll definitely want to get that noggin defense up. The same goes for each move that you use in the game. For example, the more you decide to use upper right punch, the more effective it becomes. The only way you can learn new moves and upgrade your defense is to have these moves performed on you. The game encourages you to take a beating. And like every other RPG, grinding is a must if you want to become strong enough to take on the final boss. Luckily, there are several of these little yellow respawn squares throughout the beginning of the game. The same enemy will respawn here for you to continuously battle them for more experience. This is a pivotal part of the game, as it allows you to focus on which type of fighter you really want to be. Do you want to level up your punches? Or how about your kicks? Maybe you'd rather be a wrestler. It's completely up to you. Just be careful, as if you focus too much on offense, your defense will suffer, and vice versa. There are a ton of boxer, kickboxer, and wrestling enemies in the game with their own strengths and weaknesses. So there are three main types of builds that you can go for in the game, depending on what your main focus of attack will be. You can be a boxer and spend all of your time throwing devastating punches, or focus on the opposite of that and kick the hell out of every enemy you see. You can focus your battles on grappling and wrestling moves, which is a super unique part of the game. It's really kind of amazing just how many different wrestling moves there are. From standing throws to some of the most brutal neck-breaking attacks on the ground, the combat in this game is some of the most intense I've ever seen. The harder difficulties really give you a good challenge, and it can be particularly frustrating if you make one wrong move. In addition to learning new moves, there are power-ups that can be found while platforming. Some of these can only be used in battle, and others are permanent upgrades for your offense, defense, and speed. A little bit more on that later. The story of Hybrid Heaven is straight out of a 90s action movie. You play as Secret Service agent Johnny Slater.
Hey! My name's Johnny Utah!
It's your typical Keanu Reeves style hero, and to be honest, I kinda love it. Not just because of the nostalgic 90s vibe, but it doesn't take itself too seriously. Long story short, an evil extraterrestrial has started plotting to take over the world, starting with the United States government. They're not planning a full-out assault, however. Like the game's main theme, they're using a very well thought out strategy. The plan is to kidnap the president and replace him with a clone. Yeah, this has all been done before, and in a way, it's a little predictable. However, the clones aren't just clones. They're genetically superior to their hosts in every way. They look like your normal everyday humans, but underneath their human coating lives a hybrid that is capable of superhuman strength. And oh yeah, they all know how to fight. I like to think of it as something like the Terminator or Snatcher with a twist. The aliens have spliced their DNA with human DNA, and as a result, they have a ton of different monsters of all shapes and sizes to defeat. And this is actually pretty terrifying, because going into each fight, you never really know what kind of fighter they are unless you have the strategy guide, of course. The entire game is spent underground, infiltrating the enemy lair and destroying their plans to take over the world. The main bosses you encounter as you progress are actually really interesting and unique. The hybrids all basically worship the Master, who is the main antagonist of the game that overthrew a peaceful alien race. The rest of these aliens actually go out of their way to help you. They're small and very weak, so they need you to help destroy the traitor. And by doing so, you'll save two entire civilizations, the peaceful aliens and the human race. It's actually kind of refreshing having a game where the aliens are somewhat peaceful, and you don't see that too often. Like any evil organization, there are ranks, and every high-ranking hybrid has a part to play in overtaking the world. These make for some very interesting boss battles throughout the game because they all have personality and quirks that make them very different. They all have some sort of connection to you as well. Keep in mind that they inherit the memories of their host, so they know all about you. One of them even starts to feel human near the end of the game. That's right, there's even a bit of character development on a Nintendo 64 cartridge. Who would have thunk it? Like any good story, there's actually a few twists. Without spoiling too much, you actually start the game as a fella named Diaz, but not really. Let me explain. The peaceful aliens decided to replace one of the higher ranking hybrids with you, Johnny Slater, the game's protagonist, fighting fire with fire. That's how you first get access to the underground facility, the first level of the game. You look just like Diaz, but like the hybrids, underneath that Diaz coating actually lies the human Secret Service agent, Johnny Slater. Honestly, in the beginning of the game, this is absolutely not apparent at all, and it's a little confusing, but as you progress, it all starts to make sense. So not only do you have to destroy the traitor, or the Master, and all of his generals, but you also have a rival in the character Diaz. He's extremely pissed off that you stole his identity and started running amok while bearing his name and likeness. He's got a personal vendetta against you, and as you make your way further underground, he's on the hunt for you. It really adds another element to the game's story, and it's actually kind of cool knowing that at the end of all this, you're probably going to have to take on Diaz, the guy that you thought you were at the beginning of the game. Despite being a cartridge-based game with limited memory, the game has a ton of charm and a lot of different areas to explore. The only voices in the game are in a few cutscenes at the beginning and the end, and all of the dialogue is shown via text. Let's go a little bit more in depth on how the battle system works. You have 3 meters to keep your eye on: health, power, and stamina. It's actually pretty simple. If you get hit, your life bar drops. Once it gets to 0, it's game over. Power is built up over time, and when you attack, it drops back down. You can move around in the battle arena and even run while holding Z. This will make your power regenerate slower and drain your stamina very quickly. When you move in for an attack, generally you want that power meter to be as full as possible, otherwise your attacks will be pretty weak. Stamina is used mainly for grappling moves and running around in battle. There are items in the game called battle chargers that will replenish both your health and stamina. Healing items are great when you're deep into the level, but using the healing pods throughout the game are a great way to save some of those healing items for boss battles. These healing pods are also save stations, and they are spaced throughout each level. Using them strategically is the key to surviving the game. You move your character around until you can find a good position for attacking. Press A and time stops. You've got some options. You can attack or use an item. This could be a weapon or a healing item. More on weapons a little bit later. From a standing position, you can throw punches and kicks. You'll be astounded at the selection of both of these for a Nintendo 64 cartridge. There are a lot of options here. A lot of punches and kicks have high, middle, and low variants, so think about it before you decide. At this position, which would hit the hardest, a low kick or a high kick? Maybe even a middle kick. There are several side and front kicks as well, and later in the game, if you're good and your level is high enough, you get a super badass backspin kick and a backspin elbow. It's insanely fun to use. So that's all fun and great, but you'll also have to defend yourself, and timing is key. If you don't hit that A button before the enemy does, you'll be given 3 options to defend yourself. Standing defense. Step. This is one of the most useful defensive moves in the game. It's exactly what it sounds like. You have several directions you can step in order to avoid an attack. Here's a pro tip. Most of the enemies have a little tick right before they stop time to attack you. They'll move their arms or legs in a certain way, and while this is happening, if you can manage to move the analog stick back twice, you'll do a quick little back step. This, in combination with using step once time stops, is the key to avoiding attacks. As a result, I tend to use step about 70% of the time. Guard. This is also a really good defensive decision. During a successful guard, your character will put his hands or legs up in a defensive stance, taking less damage than a flat-out straight hit would. This is pivotal for learning new moves and upping your defense stats. Moves cannot be learned unless they're performed on you, so you might as well take less damage while you're trying to learn some new moves. Counter. This seems like the obvious choice of the three, but in reality, it's last on my list for defense. On paper, it sounds great. Get out of the way of their attack and then counter with one of your own, but the problem is it's got a very low success rate. I think the percentage of it working depends on your reflex stat, and early in the game, that can be very low. It's a really high risk, high reward situation, and I have to say that it's incredibly satisfying when it does connect. Just be careful. One wrong counter can put you on the ground and thus very vulnerable to ground attacks, which are not fun. I will say that these counters are more useful towards slower and bulkier enemies that are pretty easy to dance around. If you get hit particularly hard in one area on your body, it will start flashing red. This means that the body part is vulnerable to extra damage, so try to protect it accordingly. Some attacks can even disable body parts. This will be shown on the graph of the body near the bottom of the screen. If you get caught in an attack that damages your right arm, you might not be able to use it for the rest of the battle. Standing grapples. Wrestling moves are by far some of the most fun to use in the game. They do a ton of damage at the cost of some stamina. Not only do they do a considerable amount of damage, but afterwards you'll have the advantage of having your opponent on the ground, and that's a great advantage to have. Simply get close to your enemy and press R to grapple. Once you successfully grab your opponent, press A to stop time, but be careful. They can just as easily stop time themselves in the grapple if you're not fast enough. It doesn't matter who starts the grapple, the fastest A button press will be the one that gets to attack first. The moves range from anything from a simple tackle onto the ground to a more complicated move such as the armbar, shoulder toss, head crush, and brain buster. This is important. Your head is the most vital part of your body in a battle. If you have a brain buster or head crush or even a headbutt performed on you, it could knock you out. And then boom, you're on the ground and you can't do anything at all. This is by far the scariest position to be in during the game. If you're pretty far from a save pod, you'll have to start all the way back to the last time you saved. Word of advice: do not get on the ground if you're far from a save spot. As if that's not bad enough, you can be grappled from behind as well. These moves are very close to lethal. The back head crush is absolutely ruthless, and most of these behind grappling moves are designed to damage your head or knock you out. You can turn a front-facing grapple into a back grapple by double tapping the analog stick to the left or right. It doesn't always work though. Getting out of a back grapple is the same as a front grapple. Just tap that R trigger until you get out of it and pray that it actually works. Standing grapple defense. If you're not quick enough on the draw, then you have a chance to defend yourself from the grappling position. These are very similar to the defense moves when standing in a regular boxing position. Escape. This is exactly what it sounds like. The last ditch effort to get out of this. It doesn't always work, but when it does, you essentially cancel out their attempt to wrestle you. Home free. For now. Take fall. This is the guard version of grappling. Yeah, they're going to perform the move on you, but if it works, you'll take less damage. This is the ideal option if you're wanting to level up or learn some new grappling moves, but it doesn't always work. Reversal. This is the counter for grappling moves. You'll need a high reflex and speed to even get this to work. After 20 years of playing this game, I still have a lot of trouble getting this to happen. High risk, high reward, but man, if they get you on the ground and you take damage, was it worth it? Ground grapples. Okay, so you managed to get your enemy on the ground, so now what? You can perform certain moves only when your opponent is on the ground. There are variations depending on if the enemy is on their back or laying on their stomach, and you can flip your opponent over using the R trigger. And yeah, they can do the same thing to you. Pretty much all of these are wrestling moves designed to do massive damage, such as the neck lock, back breaker, and toe and face lock. You'll unlock these moves as they're performed on you, but good luck surviving the really cool moves long enough to learn them yourself. If you don't want to get on the ground with your opponent, you can always stomp them, which is exactly what it sounds like. Later on, you'll learn some variations of this that are extremely satisfying. Is it a cheap shot? Of course, but come on. These are evil alien creatures that are trying to take over the world. They'll show you no mercy, and if you want to survive, you'll have to do the same. Ground defense. This is the worst position you'll be in during the entire game. Even so, once time stops, you'll still have some options. That is, if you're still conscious. Roll. Exactly what it sounds like. Roll out of the way and hope that you can get back up in time to pull yourself together. Reversal. Same as the standing grapple, only with a higher chance of failure. I never use this as it always backfires. Roll instead. So you can really see just how in-depth this game actually is. You have so many more options in this game than you do in any other one-on-one fighting game. The mechanic to stop time isn't for everybody, but it really allows you to fight as creatively and as strategically as you possibly can. To this day, I've played a ton of RPGs and even more fighting games, and I still have not played another game quite like this one. It's a super cool idea that I think the world wasn't quite ready for yet. I mean, at that time, Tekken and Street Fighter were still the dominant forces in the fighting game genre. That same year, Namco blessed us with Soul Calibur, which is still one of the best fighting games ever made, so you can kind of see how this flew under the radar. Like any good RPG, you have the opportunity to collect items to aid you on your journey, so let's discuss what some of these items can do for you. Items. There are many chests in the game that offer items to help you with your quest. They range from healing items that can be used in and out of battle, items to restore your stamina, which need replenishing after doing some heavy pile drivers, and even weapons. That's right, there are weapons in this game. They're kinda like guns. The only issue is a real gun used underground would be extremely bad for such an unstable environment, so we have shots instead. These are elemental-based projectiles that use anything from flames or ice to the more devastating ion and poison shots. Yeah, that's right, you can become poisoned in this game. It's only during the actual battle though, and if you're still poisoned at the end of the battle, it'll go away. Although there are items that can rid your body of poison while you're still in battle, being poisoned isn't really that bad. It's just designed to drain your health a little bit to give the opponent an admittedly unfair advantage. You can't die from the poison draining your health. You'll only get down to the last little sliver of life, but you actually have to be hit to get a game over. There's an item called the Ring Eraser that literally wraps rings around the enemy and flat out just makes them disappear. It's very useful, however it only works on certain enemies, so don't expect a free pass on super important boss battles. This is pretty nice to have when you're low on healing items and come across a bulky enemy that you're not 100% confident you can defeat. There are several items that will improve your stats temporarily in battle. Offense, defense, and speed can be improved for the duration of your battle. Other items can be used to alter the stats of your opponent as well. If you're wanting to get the battle over quickly, use a defense strainer on your enemy. If you're wanting to learn new moves from a certain opponent without getting completely obliterated by them, use an offense strainer. This is key to learning some of the best moves in the game from the strongest opponents. But these stat-reducing items are few and far between, so use them wisely. And last but not least, there are rare items called razors that will permanently raise your stats. You can find offense, defense, and speed razors throughout the game, but they're not common, nor are they easy to find. In fact, you'll need to do some tedious platforming to get most of these, which brings me to the next section. Platforming. Now let's get to the platformer part of the gameplay. You progress through the game by going room to room, opening chests and gathering items while encountering some enemies along the way. Some of these items are really hard to reach, and there are even some minor puzzles to figure out in order to figure out where you need to go. The B button opens the mini-map, and I highly suggest you use that throughout the entire game. Your character can jump onto ledges and either pull himself up or shimmy across, but be careful as your path is often hindered with security robots that mean to stop you. Don't think that you're limited to just going around them though, because you're armed with a pistol-like weapon called the diffuser. It doesn't shoot projectiles, but instead releases an EMP-like pulse that damages these robotic enemies. Depending on the game's difficulty, a few shots from the diffuser will destroy them completely, often dropping useful items for you to gather. You probably figured it out, but you can't use the diffuser in battle. It's just not going to work that way. It's only for the platforming sections. Cons. Hybrid Heaven is really a great game, but it's definitely not perfect, and this wouldn't be a proper review if I didn't spend some time talking about the cons of Hybrid Heaven. The main issue with the game is the slowdown. It happens. Not as often as you might imagine, but it does happen here and there. The frame rate tends to slow down at certain points in the game, whether it's in the battle or even if you're just moving throughout the level. The Nintendo 64 had a lot of issues with frame rates in certain games. This is a pretty big game with a lot to it, so frankly I'm not really surprised that it slows down here and there. Still, it could definitely be optimized a little better. If you're wanting to play this game, you can play it on an emulator, and it'll run so much more smoothly on there than it does on real hardware. Another issue is the story in the beginning of the game. I mean, overall the story is really kind of cool, but it takes a little bit to realize what the story actually is. There's a cutscene that plays to set everything up, and to be honest, it just makes everything more confusing. I can get why they did it though, it's like a dramatic movie thing. I mean, this is a 90s type story, remember? Rather than lay out the story from the beginning, they're leaving out certain things to let the player figure out later on. That's a cool idea if you're making a movie, but honestly, I think that this approach hurt the game. A lot of kids jumped into this game back in the day and had zero idea of what was going on and what the game even was. When you first start it, you're probably wondering what you're supposed to be doing. It doesn't really explain anything clearly. You're just left to wander around and try to figure it out on your own. You don't even fight an enemy until about 15 or 20 minutes into the game. I wish they would have had a better start, because that probably would have made the game a bit more popular at the time. This is really a great game that has given me a lot of enjoyment over the years, and everyone has that one game that they've beaten multiple times in their lifetime, and this is it for me. I have fond memories of playing this one when I was a kid and not fully understanding how it worked, but it was still fun. It's really nostalgic for me because I used to play this one and my dad would watch and comment on it as I played it. It's one of the games I used to play with my childhood best friend, who's still my best friend to this day, so in other words, I'm extremely biased towards this game for nostalgic reasons, and that's okay. Now that I'm in my 30s, I go back to it about once a year to try to beat the whole thing, and it's a great game for replayability. You can choose to use a ton of different moves to define what kind of fighter your character becomes, and after 20 years of playing this game, I'm still learning brand new moves that I've never seen before. It's insane to me knowing that there are still moves and items in this game that I just haven't discovered yet. Capturing all the footage for this video was really fun, and I was reminded why I just love this game so much. If you're searching for a new game on your Nintendo 64, I highly suggest that you give Hybrid Heaven a try. It's awful that this game received so many mixed reviews and wasn't very popular at the time. I mean, a lot of people today still don't know that it exists. Granted, it isn't for everybody. I didn't know I liked strategy-based games until I started playing this one. This is just one of those games that I feel like no one else has ever heard of, which was the main reason that I wanted to do this review. So after putting this review together after all these years, I'm curious to know what you think. Let me know in the comments section if you ever even heard of this game, and if not, do you think you'd be interested in checking it out for yourself? Thanks very much for subscribing, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Bye-bye.